weird.
And power's out. Looks like we're taking the stairs. I'm okay. I'm okay.
It was on your face and it was disgusting.
Yeah, it was.
We knew from previous VR projects that players would expect a high level of fidelity from their interactions with objects in the world, and during early testing of Half-Life Alyx, we received comments that objects were not making the sounds that players expected, given an object's material, size, and assumed weight. This led us to a more granular approach to physics sounds than we had used in prior products. For example, in the past, we would have used a single physics sound for all objects of a certain size and material. So, we would have had one sound to represent collisions of small metal objects, another sound for large wooden objects, and so on. For Half-Life Alyx, we built up a new library of object-specific sounds so that we could distinguish between similar objects, like a piece of silverware and a small metal can. Not only do we now have a library of almost 2,000 object-specific physics sounds, covering over 160 different objects, but we can further alter the sound at runtime based on an object's impact velocity and the hardness of the material it collides with. In some cases, we even layer in sounds representing an object's contents, such as matches in a matchbox or fuel in a jerry can, which can be heard when those objects are shaken by the player or collide with something at high velocity.
Hey Russ, name a song.
Flight of the Bumblebee.
Coming right up.
Given the large number of bottles throughout the game, and the fact that they feature so significantly in the distillery gameplay, we decided to make interacting with them as interesting as possible using a procedural liquid effect. Each bottle is assigned a random fill level, and values for the amount of liquid agitation and foaming are calculated based on the bottle's movement. This is stored in the object's tint colour, which is otherwise unused. The shader calculates the liquid level based on the bottle's orientation in-game. Since the amount of liquid visible in a bottle as a proportion of its height is different when oriented upright, sideways or upside down, different values are used for each in order to preserve the apparent volume of liquid inside. The liquid's surface is then displaced by a number of sine waves, modulated with the agitation value to create rippling waves. The areas determined to contain liquid, as opposed to air, take on the colour and refraction index values of that liquid. Bubbles and foam effects are added based on the agitation and foaming values. These are procedural and can be modified to create a variety of different behaviours. Several layers of bubbles are created in a local view space relative to the object, so that they're stable from frame to frame, and can always move upwards relative to gravity. Artists can set a variety of parameters per liquid, such as colour, glow, foaming potential, wave properties, and a meniscus at the surface of the liquid which curls up around the edges of the volume, helping to communicate the viscosity of the liquid. The refracted environment seen through the glass and liquid is sampled from the same cubic environment map of the local area that's used for reflections, and so the bottles are effectively opaque and do not have to blend with the frame buffer in the way that transparent objects normally do. This was a strategic design choice, as along with storing the physics data in the tint colour, it means that the bottles can be rendered together as a batch in arbitrary order, which is critical for graphics throughput. In the end, the refractive liquid effect allows for a variety of interactions to take place at a fidelity that is especially compelling with tracked hand controllers in VR.
Ooh, breaker boxes. Let's go back to the elevator plan. I'm gonna get the power back on.
Let's show.
Here we go.
This hotel's ancient. The wiring's gonna be a real rat's nest.
Let's check the elevator. Boom. Power back on. And up we... This place is overgrown. How dangerous do we think this stuff really is?
Well, it is spores from another dimension, so probably... yeah, extremely. But a rare opportunity to examine alien flora up close.
The Xen flora in this area animate in response to the Vortigaunt energy pulsing from the Combine substation outside. Since the substation itself is not visible from inside the hotel, it was important that we continue to remind players of its presence using audio and visual cues, and the Xen flora provided a perfect opportunity to do this. The shaders used on the Xen flora help illustrate the plant's response to the energy pulses in a few different ways. For example, the villi and cilia elongate and vibrate, while many of the other plants pulsate or glow. The intensity and timing of these effects are driven directly by the sound system, meaning that the audio and visual reinforcement of the Combine substation pulses are always in sync.
Starting to think I shouldn't be breathing this stuff.
Agreed. Just keep moving. Maybe breathe less.
Breaching the quarantine zone revealed a new hidden secret of the city. Alien plant life from Xen has taken root on Earth and has been thriving in the shadows of City 17. On the development team, the Northern Star Hotel was referred to as Hotel Xen before it had a proper name in the story, as it was the first location we used to explore what Xen foliage could look like and how it might consume any given environment. One of the challenges the environment team faced when designing the Xen foliage was layering a new look onto an existing environment without having to rebuild Xen-infested versions of every prop. We relied heavily on texture blending and kit bashing of Xen foliage shapes to handle most of the big environmental changes when xenifying a scene. We also added some new features to our level editor, Hammer, which allowed for more creative manipulation of assets to reduce repetition. For example, we could pose certain types of meshes such as the Xen tentacles. These could be placed, scaled, stretched and manipulated to snake through an environment, giving a handcrafted look without every asset having to be built for a specific location. These elements were editable in Hammer so they could be adjusted at any time, but were baked into static meshes when the map was compiled to improve their runtime performance.
Oh, that's not good. Russell!
The Reviver, one of the new enemy types introduced in Half-Life Alyx, arose from our observation that playtesters enjoyed searching their environment in VR much more than they had in traditional games. In addition to rewarding that desire to search with ammunition and resin, we experimented with how it could be part of fighting an enemy. We began prototyping with a fast headcrab variant we called the Runner, modifying its behaviour to run away and hide from the player after it attacked. We found players really enjoyed looking for a small, hidden enemy they knew was somewhere within a dense environment. They also liked shooting at a fast-moving enemy that was able to run under and behind everyday objects like tables and chairs. Lastly, players talked about liking the way they got to be the aggressor in combat for once, since everywhere else in the game they felt like they were always on the defensive. While feedback was overall very positive, there was one specific problem: how to encourage players to search for the runner. After a few runner encounters, we found players would start to realise they didn't have to look for the runner at all. They could simply wait for it to run away and then leave the room. So we started prototyping various ways in which the runner could become more dangerous if not found, setting up a time pressure where players had to find the runner quickly or the situation would get worse. After some experimentation, we landed on the prototype where the runner could revive a fallen zombie and become a new kind of foe, one that was more dangerous than a runner or zombie. After this change, the runner was renamed internally to the Reviver, and we began assembling the various encounters around it. It took a lot of playtesting to balance out all the various elements of the Reviver fights, because they involved multiple separate stages: combat versus the Reviver, searching for a hidden Reviver, and combat versus a revived zombie. In the end, we still didn't feel like we'd created enough of a foolproof reason for players to need to search for hidden revivers, so we turned the Reviver's heart into a key, requiring players to collect it.
An enemy's animation can elicit a powerful emotional response from players, especially in VR. While developing the Reviver, we learned that sometimes a character performance can have unintended consequences. In our initial Reviver prototypes, we simply used a blue-tinted headcrab model with rudimentary electrical effects. The prototype was successful enough in playtesting that we decided to invest in a new, purpose-built model for the Reviver, with electrical skin and improved effects. Players identified the new Reviver successfully in the game, but we ran into a new problem. Players didn't want to fight it anymore. While the blue headcrab was easily identified as something dangerous, the new model was something that players had to evaluate from scratch, and they didn't necessarily see it as threatening. In fact, the animations authored for the new Reviver model were interpreted by many players as friendly or even cute. Players would often approach the creature to try to pet it, or worse, refuse to kill it to retrieve the required puzzle piece, blocking their progression in the game. If they did then realize that they were going to have to kill the cute creature to proceed, they felt horrible having to go through with it. To fix this, we reauthored most of the Reviver's animations, making it significantly more unsettling and menacing. We also made the Reviver more aggressive by adding a jump attack if the player got too close. With these changes to animation and behavior, players once again were fighting the Reviver as intended, and they no longer wanted to take it home as a pet.
This is the room featured in the very first shot of the Half-Life Alyx announcement trailer. It's not an obvious choice for that use. The room is dark, not particularly colorful, and it's a pretty pedestrian corridor. Cleaning supplies and laundry baskets are not in themselves attention grabbers. But we chose this scenario because it very effectively demonstrates the excitement and tension that we thought was typical of the game. All game trailers require careful design. Conveying a game's core experience in just a few moments is tricky, even at the best of times. But we believe the Half-Life Alyx trailer had to work harder than most to meet a particularly difficult and uncommon set of challenges. We had kept the existence of the game under wraps, so shipping the trailer was going to be the first time in 13 years that Valve had shown any work on Half-Life. On top of that, the trailer had to quickly communicate that Valve had chosen to make the next installment of Half-Life a VR game. And although we were very confident in the decision to make a VR game and in the quality of what we had built, we still worried that revealing those decisions to the world might cause even our most loyal fans to make their own decision, that we had truly lost our minds. Those of us working on the trailer knew it had to make people so excited that they could put those worries aside. The trailer also had to clearly convey that the game was not Half-Life 3, meaning that it did not take place after the events of Episode 2. Half-Life Alyx was instead a prequel of sorts, occurring between the events of Half-Life and Half-Life 2. In addition, the trailer had to show depth, variety, familiar characters, and enough novelty and surprise to get across to the viewer that this was really and truly a full-fledged installment in the Half-Life series, not a small VR experiment or a spin-off. This was a tall order, but the entire game team rallied around the effort because everyone understood the value of the work. We're just as proud of the result we achieved in the trailer as we are of any other part of Half-Life Alyx.
Will take me up to the substation.
Half-Life Alyx supports 3 types of player movement: continuous movement, shift teleport, and blink teleport. Early on, one of the properties of blink teleport, and to a lesser degree shift teleport, was that players would often refer to the actual mechanic of teleporting when describing their movement through the environment. I teleported to the desk, or I teleported into cover, was often how players would describe their actions, and it served as an unconscious reminder that they were interacting with a game in a specific way. To address this, we made a couple of key changes early on that significantly altered the way players recounted their movement, and as a result, pulled them further into a more convincing virtual reality. One of these changes was the visual indicator that represented the teleport destination. We swapped the abstract cylindrical indicator used in the lab for a pair of holographic feet. The feet helped provide a sense of physical presence and indicated the direction the player would face upon finishing a teleport. We also added animated feet between the player's current location and the teleport target. These feet illustrated the path the player would traverse, further helping provide a fiction for their movement through the environment. Along with the visual interface changes, we also added audio of footsteps and body movements that would play after a teleport to effectively summarize the player's movement through the space. This isn't something everyone necessarily notices at first, but it is quite obvious when it's missing or incorrect. Footstep audio transformed how players described their movement through the world, and players would often refer back to movement in the environment as walking or running, as opposed to referring to game terminology.
Compared to our traditional first-person experiences, in VR we found it was sometimes all too easy to create an intense atmosphere. This can be to the game's advantage, but it can also be detrimental in cases where our focus is on training players in some new mechanic. In intense situations, players frequently fail to notice or retain critical information, and as a result, we often had to reduce tension in areas of the game where we were introducing players to something new. The audio of the reviver here as the player descends beneath the hotel is designed to ease players into the idea that they will be encountering the creature that they had briefly seen as they entered the hotel earlier. The reviver's scream and its shadow on the wall are designed to reduce tension by indicating the position of the reviver around the corner, removing any potential surprise. Telegraphing the reviver's position and giving players the upper hand helps set up the resurrection scene, where players want to observe the reviver instead of shooting at it immediately. This is critical because this is the first time the player sees the reviver reanimating a zombie, and if players are too distracted to take it in, they won't be successful in the upcoming fight.
Lightning dog. Oh my god, it went into a guy. Russell?
dog gone? What happened?
New development? It went into a dead guy.
No!
Yes. I had to shoot both of them. It was nuts, Russell.
It sounds nuts!
Oh, it was.
One of the challenges with the Reviver's resurrection mechanic was training players that the Reviver was the target, and the zombie was effectively just an inert vehicle that could not be damaged. This was a significant departure from what we had been training players to expect. Up until this point in the game, players would see a zombie, shoot at it, and as long as they hit it enough times, it would die. The Reviver breaks that expectation, and in early tests, players thought the game was broken when the zombie wouldn't die or even react to being shot. We had to make a number of changes to revive zombies to train players that this behavior was intentional. First, we designed the revived zombies' introduction animation to use particle effects and audio to draw attention to the changes that result in this new type of combat. Second, we substituted in dull particle and impact sounds to make shooting the zombie feel less impactful than it did in previous encounters with ordinary non-revived zombies. And finally, we modified the revived zombie so that it doesn't play any flinch animation or respond to bullet impacts, further communicating to players that its behavior is different. We also used the Reviver itself to illustrate the new combat experience. Electrical effects were added to indicate the Reviver's movement inside the zombie, with a bright pop and glow as it emerged at a new location on the zombie's body. With these new visuals and satisfying impact sounds and screeches from the Reviver when hit, playtesters were no longer confused and consistently enjoyed the new combat mechanic.
In our early designs, a revived zombie was just an invincible zombie with a moving vulnerable spot. Playtesting revealed this to be less tense and threatening than the Reviver on its own, and since we wanted the revived zombie to be a higher stakes adversary, we needed to enhance its offensive capabilities. As a natural extension of the electrified nature of the Reviver, we chose to create an electrical field around the revived zombie, so that players who got too close would take heavy electrical damage. This worked well for many playtests, until we observed a player who was a proficient real-world marksman. This player was able to easily defeat the revived zombie without ever being threatened by it. In response, we gave the revived zombie its electrified ground counterattack, which forces players to change positions to avoid damage. This created a cadence of attack and retreat that was more tense and satisfying for all players.
Since a VR game must always be rendered from a virtual camera that matches the player's own point of view, we have limited opportunities to control what the player sees. Elevators are one of the few tools we have in VR to direct the player's view. A rising elevator like this one can be used similar to a crane shot that you might see in film, going from one elevation to another, revealing a beautiful vista or dramatic story beat. In VR, elevator rides can be challenging to make comfortable, as the motion of the virtual elevator is inconsistent with the player's own vestibular system. We found that we can make the elevator rides in Half-Life Alyx comfortable enough for most players by moving the elevator slowly and limiting how much the player could see out of the elevator. This particular elevator was initially far more open, but we gradually introduced more and more visual obstruction to the design so that the player always had some significant portion of the elevator in their field of view. This meant that we were able to get the dramatic reveal of the hotel exterior and Combine substation we desired, but players were comfortable since they could always see the elevator, which was in their own frame of reference.
He's on foot, moving at 3 miles an hour, plus he's a fugitive. He's only got one leg, there's obstacles, no direct path. You know what? I'm not gonna lie to you. He should be back by now.
Yeah. So I should be worried.
Normally, yes, but you're the one headed towards the danger, so I'd say we should be the ones worried about you.
After exiting the elevator, the player gets their closest view yet of the Combine substation attached to the exterior of the hotel. While the Combine architecture can veer into the abstract, it's often at its most successful when contrasted with a human structure. Beyond this, we always try to drive the visual design with an invented function, ideally to support the gameplay or story. In this case, the routing of some unusual power source to the vault from various parts of the city. The player doesn't know it at this point, but this substation is designed to essentially torture the song out of a group of Vortigaunts who are housed in the attached pod farms. The output is collected from the Vortigaunts before being reharmonized by a single conductor Vortigaunt via the cable tuner apparatus seen at the root of the transmission cables that run up to the vault itself. This design gave us the opportunity to subsequently meet another Vortigaunt, and acted as enough of a constraint to allow us to design an interaction that would physically compromise the substation as the player exits the hotel in the next map.
Uh-oh. This guy's not wearing a shirt.
Fun fact, only 10.1% of viewers are subscribed to Half Peeps. If you enjoy the videos, do consider subscribing. For science, you monster.